Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the coldest unsolved cases in human history, literally frozen. We're talking about Ötzi the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old murder victim preserved so perfectly that he looks like he fell asleep yesterday and forgot to set his alarm for the next 50 centuries. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. The discovery of Ötzi, the Iceman, did not involve a team of elite scientists, a dramatic excavation, or even a guy with a notebook pretending to know what sediment is. No, it began with two hikers in 1991 who were just trying to enjoy the Alps without slipping to their deaths. They looked down and saw what they assumed was an unfortunate tourist who had really misread the weather report. The body was lying face down, one arm stiff, the other twisted under him like he had tried to stop his fall, but remembered too late that human limbs don't actually do that. His skin had the delightful texture of sun-dried leather, and his whole vibe screamed, "I've been dead a long time, please stop poking me." Naturally, the hikers called the authorities, because nothing kills the mood of a peaceful alpine walk like realising you've stumbled onto a crime scene from the Copper Age. The police arrived with enthusiasm usually reserved for parking violations. They took one look at the frozen figure and assumed this was just another mountaineer who ignored every safety sign ever invented. Then came the moment that future historians will never stop laughing about. The police tried to pry his body out of the ice by yanking on his arm. That's right. The oldest preserved corpse in Europe was almost removed with the same technique used to open a stubborn pickle jar. But then someone noticed the shoes. Not boots, not sneakers. Shoes made from animal hide and grass, the kind of footwear you only see in documentaries narrated by people with soothing voices. Then they found the copper axe. Clean, polished, and very much not from the modern hiker section at REI. Copper tools haven't been standard gear since people believed the wheel was a trendy new invention. That's when the penny dropped. This wasn't a recent casualty. This wasn't even a medieval casualty. This was a 5,300-year-old man who had somehow refused to decompose out of sheer spite. Archaeologists were summoned, and they arrived like kids on Christmas morning. Suddenly, the police weren't allowed to touch anything anymore, which was for the best, because the next logical move would have been someone shouting, "Okay, let's just tug harder," and just like that, the Alps delivered the world's oldest cold case, literally frozen, perfectly preserved, and ready for a forensic comeback tour 5 millennia in the making. If Ötzi had died anywhere else, a forest, a field, literally any location with normal weather, we would have nothing, no body, no gear. Maybe a tooth or two if we were lucky, but Ötzi didn't die in a reasonable place. No, he chose a freezing alpine mountaintop, the prehistoric equivalent of hitting save on your entire existence. The glacier that swallowed him acted like a long-term storage unit, the kind you forget to pay for, but somehow never loses your stuff. Thanks to several thousand years of ice, snow, and the universe's worst freezer burn, Ötzi was preserved with more detail than some modern celebrity skincare routines. His skin had turned into a high-quality Copper Age weatherproof hide. His hair survived with the stubborn determination of a man who said, "I paid for this haircut and I'm taking it with me to the afterlife." His fingernails, intestines, and even the contents of his stomach were still intact. That's not preservation. That's a cosmic overachievement. When scientists examined him for the first time, the reaction was basically, "Wow, he looks great." Like, disturbingly great. His tattoos, over 60 of them, still lined his body, mostly along joints and pressure points. Early commentators claimed this meant spiritual significance. Later analysis suggested he probably just had chronic pain and invented acupuncture out of desperation, which honestly tracks. Nothing motivates innovation like bad joints and no ibuprofen. Then there were his clothes. Fashion forward for 3,300 BCE, but also wildly chaotic. A coat made from goat fur, leggings from sheep hide, a hat from brown bear fur, which says a lot about both his confidence and his risk tolerance. His shoes were a masterpiece, grass-woven interiors with deerskin exteriors, basically Crocs for ancient mountain survival. And let's not forget the backpack, a wooden frame with leather straps that suspiciously resembles something you'd buy on Etsy from a guy named Rune. Everything about him screamed, this man knew how to survive, which makes the fact he got murdered even more embarrassing. You can be outfitted like the Batman of prehistory and still get taken out by one well-placed arrow. What's most impressive is that Ötzi lay there for 5,300 years without anyone disturbing him. No predators, no scavengers, not even a curious goat. Just a man, a glacier, and a murder mystery aging like fine wine no one asked for. If there's one thing Ötzi didn't do, it was travel light. The man hiked like someone who trusted absolutely nothing. Not the weather, not the mountains, not even other humans, which, to be fair, turned out to be a tragically accurate instinct. When researchers catalogued his belongings, the list read like the Copper Age version of a doomsday prepper's backpack. First, the copper axe, and not some primitive chunk of metal. This thing was a status symbol. Pure copper blade, finely polished, mounted on a yew wood handle. Owning this axe 5,300 years ago was the equivalent of driving a brand new Mercedes through a village where everyone else has donkeys. It sent a message. I'm important. And also, don't mess with me. Then there was the bow. Unfortunately, it wasn't finished, which raises questions. Did he break the old one? Was he rushed when fixing it? Did someone interrupt his arts and crafts session with violence? The bow was nearly his height, made of yew wood, the kind of weapon that, once complete, could drop a deer or a rude neighbour. His arrows were a whole saga, some complete, some half-made. One had the wrong fletching angle, proving Ötzi was either in a hurry or had the prehistoric version of ADHD. If you ever feel bad about procrastinating, remember, this man literally died before finishing his to-do list. Next, the knife, a small flint blade with a wooden handle, not fancy, but reliable. And yes, it had someone else's blood on it. Nothing says, I've had a stressful morning, like carrying a knife that's recently been in another person. Researchers identified 4 separate blood types across his gear. So Ötzi wasn't just running from danger. He had participated. He carried a fire-starting kit, like a man who had been betrayed by the weather before. Flint, pyrite, and tinder fungus. Basically, everything necessary to start a fire in any conditions short of a full biblical flood. And we can't skip the medicine kit. Bundles of birch polypore fungus, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, and anti-parasite. This wasn't folklore. This was effective prehistoric pharmacology. The man was treating infections before infection was even a word. Finally, the frame backpack. Reinforced wooden structure, leather straps, sturdy, practical, and 100% Etsy core. It held everything from tools to food scraps, proving the man believed in being prepared for absolutely anything. Anything except, apparently, an arrow to the back. If there's one thing Ötzi didn't do before dying, it was skip lunch. In fact, the man's final hours look less like a desperate flight for survival, and more like someone panic-eating their way through a crisis. Thanks to the icy miracle of nature's longest-running refrigerator, scientists were able to analyze not just his bones and organs, but the snack choices he made shortly before being murdered. And let me tell you, Ötzi went out with a full stomach. His last meal was a prehistoric charcuterie board, ibex meat, red deer, spelt grains, fat, pollen, and what can only be described as wild herbs someone claimed were healthy. Basically, he ate the Copper Age version of a protein-heavy meal prep box designed by a caveman nutrition influencer. What's fascinating and slightly comedic is that he ate 2 distinct meals before he died, like a man who couldn't decide if he needed fuel for a hike or comfort food for emotional devastation. Meal 1. This earlier meal shows no stress markers, no elevated activity, no panic. He was just vibing, eating ibex meat, enjoying his day, totally unaware that someone would soon turn him into a historical celebrity corpse. Meal 2. This one was different. The ibex meat was consumed under stress. His metabolism was in fight or flight mode. Basically, he inhaled his food like someone who had just been told, "Listen, you might want to eat now. You won't get the chance later." We know this because his stomach still held visible layers of chewed fat and meat, the digestive equivalent of leaving your browser tabs open at the moment of your death. And here's the wildest part. Researchers found fresh pollen from plants blooming in warm valleys, yet he died high in the mountains, meaning sometime that day he had travelled from valley warmth to icy heights in a hurry. You don't climb thousands of feet unless you're incredibly motivated, you're incredibly stupid, or someone is trying to kill you. Given the arrow in his back, we're going with door number 3. The meal also had charcoal traces, which suggests Ötzi cooked something moments before being murdered. Imagine that, standing over a fire, grilling your last bite of ibex, thinking, "Ah yes, nothing like a warm meal before a long climb," while your assassin is somewhere behind a boulder thinking, "Perfect, he's distracted." So yes, Ötzi's Last Supper wasn't ceremonial, spiritual, or poetic. It was stress-eating, and unfortunately, not nearly enough. If Ötzi's final hours were a movie, this is where the soundtrack would shift from peaceful mountain flutes to "something is very wrong" drums. By the time he started climbing the Alps for the last time, he wasn't just tired or stressed, he was visibly injured. And not, "I stubbed my toe on a rock," injured. More, "I've just had a physical altercation with multiple humans, and none of them sent a follow-up apology." His hands told the story first. Fresh cuts. Several of them. Not old scars or ancient wounds, but brand new slices. The kind you get when someone is trying to hit you, stab you, or politely request your death. His knuckles were swollen, which suggests he wasn't just blocking blows. He was swinging back. Imagine the world's coldest bar fight, except instead of a bar it's a forested valley, and instead of beer you have water from a glacier stream, and the deep, bone-crushing knowledge that bathrooms have not been invented yet. Ötzi's knife added another chapter to the tale. It had traces of blood on it, not his, and the blood belonged to multiple individuals. This means one thing. Ötzi had been dealing with more than one opponent. Whether he fought one after another like a prehistoric action hero or was overwhelmed in a chaotic group skirmish, we'll never know. What we do know is that he did not leave that fight unmarked. His gear was damaged, his body was wearing the aftermath, and his general energy screamed, "I need a nap, a doctor, and maybe divine intervention." What makes the scene even more dramatic is what he did next. Ötzi began repairing his bow, not casually, urgently. Half-assembled arrows, a half-finished bowstring, wooden shafts carved in haste. The man was preparing for another confrontation. You don't sit down after a fight, bleeding and exhausted, and start doing arts and crafts unless you believe violence is coming back for round 2. His movements in the hours after the fight paint a clear picture. He was trying to get away. He climbed upward into dangerous terrain, the kind no sane person chooses, unless they're either extremely confident or extremely hunted. With injured hands and a partially repaired weapon, he pushed toward higher ground, leaving behind the valley where everything had gone wrong. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't lost. He was retreating, fast, wounded, and deeply aware that someone wasn't finished with him yet. By the time Ötzi was climbing the final stretch of the Alps, he was essentially a walking crime scene, held together by adrenaline, ibex fat, and the stubborn refusal to die somewhere inconvenient. But fate, or his murderer, had other plans. The defining moment of this entire saga came not from his knife, not from his injuries, and not from the suspiciously unfinished bow he was trying to assemble mid-crisis. It came from an arrow. A single shot. A perfect strike launched by someone who either had remarkable aim or had been practicing on many, many previous victims. Forensic scans showed the arrow entered his back at an angle only possible if his killer was behind him and slightly above, meaning someone had taken the literal high ground. The arrow tore through muscle, pierced into his left shoulder, and severed an artery. This wasn't an oops, missed the deer moment. This was intentional, precise, and as subtle as a prehistoric text message saying, "We are done here." Once that arrow hit, Ötzi wouldn't have lasted long. Minutes at best. The force of the shot was strong enough to bury the flint arrowhead so deeply that even modern scanners had to work to find it. The shaft had broken off, likely in the chaos as he fell, leaving the tip lodged securely in his body for 5,300 years. What's almost tragic is that Ötzi probably never even saw it coming. He was moving uphill, exhausted from earlier conflict, clutching gear that was only partially functional, and likely trying to put distance between himself and the people who were very clearly trying to make him one with the glacier. The killer waited until exhaustion and altitude had done their job, then delivered a clean, lethal blow from behind, the Copper Age version of a professional hit. The moment the arrow struck, Ötzi would have lost strength instantly. His blood pressure dropped, his breath faltered, and whatever fight he had left evaporated. He collapsed on the stone and ice, face first, without even having time to turn around. The scene is haunting. A man frozen in the exact posture of his death, arms extended, body limp, knife still strapped to him, tools scattered in the snow he never meant to fall on. There were no final words, no dramatic last stand, no heroic retaliation, just a silent, sudden ending, the kind of death only a skilled assassin or extremely committed enemy could deliver. Ötzi wasn't just attacked, he was executed. Ötzi's last moments were not glamorous. There was no dramatic speech, no heroic final stand, no ancient equivalent of, "Tell my family I love them." Instead, his final act on Earth was collapsing face first onto a slab of ice with the exhausted grace of someone who'd simply had enough of the day's nonsense. After the arrow struck, he staggered a little farther uphill, because apparently he believed climbing higher would help, as if altitude had ever solved anyone's problems. The Alps were not on his side. The landscape was steep, the air thin, and Ötzi's blood was rapidly leaving the building like an unimpressed theatre audience. His heart and lungs were failing, and any attempt to fight back, scream, or sprint was impossible. Physiologically speaking, he was out of moves. He fell forward, arms splayed, like a man who had been denied even the dignity of choosing a comfortable position to die in. Modern archaeologists found him in the exact posture he collapsed in. Not rearranged, not disturbed, just lying there with the defeated stillness of a person who thought, "You know what? I'm not getting up from this." One could argue the glacier was both cruel and kind. Cruel because it offered him nowhere to hide, no shelter, not even a soft patch of snow to cushion his fall. Kind because, once he was down, it embraced him with millennia of ice and said, "Don't worry, buddy. I'll handle the preservation." The killer didn't come back to check the body, loot the gear, or confirm the job. They simply left. Whoever shot him must have known the wound was fatal. Or maybe they had other problems to deal with, like running before Ötzi's friends arrived, or pretending they hadn't just committed the oldest documented homicide in human history. And so, the Alps kept him. Wind, ice, snow, storms, none of it moved him. His body slowly froze, then became part of the glacier itself, preserved better than any pharaoh wrapped in gold. No animals got to him. No scavengers clawed at him. Even nature seemed to say, "We're saving this one. He looks important." Little did anyone know, 5,000 years later, Ötzi would be found exactly as he fell, like a prehistoric crime scene photo waiting for someone to finally show up and file the report. His final collapse wasn't just a tragic moment, it became the opening scene of the world's oldest cold case. If Ötzi himself couldn't tell us who killed him, his blood certainly tried. Unfortunately, blood is terrible at keeping secrets when you have modern forensic technology, and Ötzi's turned out to be the biological equivalent of a messy group chat. When scientists analysed the microscopic traces left on his tools and clothing, they weren't expecting anything dramatic. Maybe some deer residue, maybe something he cooked earlier that day. What they found instead was straight out of a prehistoric crime drama. 4 different human blood types. This means that in the hours before his death, Ötzi had interacted with, or stabbed, at least 4 other people. And given that only one of them was him, things start looking suspiciously like the Copper Age was less peaceful Neolithic farming community and more every man for himself, please bring your own weapons. His flint knife held the most concerning evidence, someone else's blood smeared along the blade, and not dried old flecks from weeks ago, fresh patterns consistent with recent contact. His arrows had similar traces, suggesting they had been shot, retrieved, and possibly reused. Archaeologists politely call this evidence of conflict. A less academic term would be, this man was busy. The blood found on his gear paints a timeline. First, there was the close quarters skirmish, the one that left Ötzi with cut hands, bruises, and the kind of emotional exhaustion only achievable when fighting multiple people without proper hydration. Then there was the retreat, the frantic attempt to escape up the mountain, and the desperate scramble to repair his weapons. And finally, the fatal arrow fired by a pursuer who apparently had the accuracy of an Olympic archer and the ethics of a soap opera villain. But the most haunting detail comes from the shield-like structure of the blood itself. The splatter on his coat and tools suggests Ötzi might have helped someone right before running. Some researchers believe he attempted to carry or aid a wounded companion. If true, that means his final hours weren't just violent. They were tragic, heroic, and deeply unlucky. Imagine trying to save someone, only to be chased up a mountain and shot for your trouble. Prehistoric friendship was a dangerous game. In the end, the blood patterns turned Ötzi from frozen hiker into last survivor of a very bad afternoon. His tools weren't just supplies, they were evidence. 4 blood types, 1 murder victim, and a mystery written in red, preserved in ice. If there is one detail in this entire murder case that keeps archaeologists up at night, it's the copper axe. Not the arrow in his back. Not the 4 different people's blood on his gear. Not the fact that his final moments looked like an ancient episode of Man versus Everything. No, it's that nobody stole the axe. This was not some ordinary tool. A copper axe in 3300 BCE was a luxury item. Not nice outfit luxury, more like you are officially the coolest guy in a 50-mile radius. Copper was rare, hard to extract, and even harder to work. Owning a polished copper blade meant status, authority, and probably a little prehistoric swagger. So why was it still on Ötzi's body? If this had been a robbery, the killer would have taken the axe immediately. If it had been an opportunistic attack, the weapon would have vanished long before the ice ever touched him. Even if the killer didn't personally want it, they could have traded it for food, clothes, or a slightly less miserable life expectancy. But instead, it was left behind, neatly, deliberately, untouched. Almost like the murderer wanted the world to know. This wasn't about the stuff. This was about him. This single detail transforms the crime from a random act of violence into something much pettier and far more human, a personal grudge. Someone wanted Ötzi dead, yes, but they didn't want to benefit from it. They weren't trying to rob him or humiliate him. They just wanted him gone permanently. One theory suggests the killer may have been part of Ötzi's own group. Someone who would have recognized the axe instantly and understood its value, yet still left it. Perhaps they didn't take it because everyone in the tribe would have recognized it. Imagine showing up to camp with your murdered friend's prized copper axe. Oh, hey guys, don't mind this, I found it. Not a great alibi. Another theory, even colder, is that the killer left the axe as a message. Something symbolic, like saying, I didn't kill you for your belongings, I killed you because I had a problem with you. And if that isn't the most human, petty, passive-aggressive motive imaginable, I don't know what is. The copper axe lying untouched beside the body doesn't solve the case. But it does tell us one thing clearly. Whoever killed Ötzi didn't want his riches. They wanted his silence. If there is one theme that repeats through human history like a broken drum, it's betrayal. Romans betrayed each other. Medieval kings betrayed each other. Your co-worker probably betrayed you by taking credit for that spreadsheet. But Ötzi? He may have been the first recorded victim of the classic smile at you over lunch, stab you in the back later routine. Literally, science shows that shortly before he died, Ötzi shared a meal with someone. The pollen in his stomach, the meat he ate, even the way the food was cooked all point to a social moment, a fire, companionship. Not the vibe of a man hiding alone in the bushes like a terrified prehistoric raccoon. He wasn't eating in secret. He wasn't starving. He ate a full, warm meal, with help. Whoever prepared or shared that food with him was close, trusted, familiar, possibly even bonded with him through the shared trauma of ancient life, where everything, weather, wildlife, other humans, could kill you with impressive enthusiasm, and yet, hours later, someone shot him in the back. We're not talking about an arrow fired by a stranger stumbling across him in the mountains. We're talking about a shot that required timing, tracking, and intimate knowledge of where Ötzi would be. The killer didn't ambush him randomly. They followed him, waited, watched. They knew he'd climb. They knew he'd flee upward. They knew he'd be exhausted from earlier conflict. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from a passing enemy. It comes from someone who knows your habits, someone who knows your footsteps, someone who knows you trust them enough to sit down and eat a meal without checking behind you every 3 seconds. Betrayal in the Copper Age wasn't subtle. There were no passive-aggressive texts or vague social media posts. There were only 2 options. Discuss your feelings like a civilized human, or shoot your problems in the back with a flint-tipped arrow. And it's clear which option Ötzi's companion chose. Imagine the scene. 2 men sitting by the fire, eating calmly, maybe even joking about how exhausting survival is. Then something changes. A disagreement, a rivalry, a threat, or a decision that someone wasn't willing to let go. Hours later, that same man pulled back a bowstring and aimed steadily at Ötzi's spine. When the arrow flew, it carried not just flint, but intention. So when people say, the Alps killed him, they're wrong. It wasn't the mountain. It was someone he trusted. Ötzi's killer vanished into history with the confidence of someone absolutely certain no one would ever investigate a homicide on top of a glacier. And honestly, that was a pretty safe assumption for roughly 5,000 years. There were no witnesses, no DNA databases, no police sketches, no irritated detectives sipping coffee and saying, "Something doesn't add up here, Johnson." There was only silence, snow, and a cooling body lying face down in the world's most remote crime scene. After the arrow struck, the murderer didn't bother to confirm the kill or take a trophy. No dramatic villain speech, no looting. Not even a polite toe poke to check if Ötzi was still breathing. They simply walked away, presumably with the calm satisfaction of someone saying, "Great, that problem is handled," and immediately failing to consider that glaciers are extremely judgmental and excellent at long-term storage. What happened next is the part that frustrates every archaeologist. The aftermath we'll never see. Did the killer return to his group and pretend nothing happened? Did he explain away the arrow he just used? Did he say Ötzi wandered off like a prehistoric toddler at a marketplace? Did the group even care? Humans love drama, but prehistoric humans also loved minding their own business. We'll never know which category this particular tribe fell into. And what about the people whose blood ended up on Ötzi's gear? Did they survive their injuries? Did they limp home and spin an entirely different version of events, painting themselves as the hero and Ötzi as the problem? If you've ever heard 2 people describe the same argument, you already know those stories would not have matched. We also can't see how the tribe reacted when Ötzi didn't return. Was he missed? Was he important? Was he the local troublemaker people tolerated out of obligation? Maybe they had a brief moment of concern before shrugging and saying, "Well, that's the mountains for you." Or maybe his absence sparked conflict, suspicion, or a quiet panic that their own group had turned on itself. The truth is, after Ötzi collapsed, the world around him kept turning. His people lived, argued, hunted, slept, and aged without him. His killer continued existing, carrying the secret of a perfect murder, a secret they thought would dissolve into snow and wind, not parade itself across every museum documentary ever made. The aftermath is forever missing, but the silence that followed his death? That lasted 5,000 years. If Ötzi could see the number of scientists who have examined him over the past 3 decades, he would probably file a harassment complaint. The man has been poked, scanned, sliced, swabbed, X-rayed, DNA tested, and analysed from every angle except his Thoughts and Feelings tab, because unfortunately, that's the only category the glacier didn't preserve. Once he was hauled out of the ice, modern forensic science descended on him like kids attacking a piñata. Except instead of candy, they got data, endless, glorious data. His teeth gave clues about his childhood diet. His bones revealed injuries from his final days. His fingernails told the story of stress cycles leading up to the murder. Even his hair held chemical signatures that tracked everywhere he had been in the weeks before he died. Which is impressive, considering most living people don't remember what they did last Tuesday. His tattoos, more than 60 of them, were a highlight. Not the artistic kind you get from a tattoo parlour with a playlist. These were simple lines and crosses, strategically placed along joints and muscle groups. Researchers once assumed they were spiritual symbols. But further analysis suggests something much less mystical. He was trying to treat chronic pain, essentially giving himself prehistoric acupuncture. So the oldest tattooed man on Earth wasn't a ritual leader or an artist. He was just someone with terrible back pain and no access to ibuprofen. Then came the ultimate forensic flex, CT scans. Ötzi has been scanned more than the average airport traveller. Doctors reconstructed his arteries, blood vessels, internal organs, even his facial structure. All from imagery so detailed you could practically diagnose his stress levels. They discovered heart disease, arthritis, dental problems and parasites. Basically a full medical report that screams, life in 3300 BCE was rough. His stomach contents were another investigative goldmine. With high-resolution imaging, researchers identified every component of his last meal, down to the exact cut of ibex meat and the degree of fat marbling. It's the kind of analysis no modern person wants applied to their midnight fridge raids. But the biggest find? A tiny, nearly invisible tear in one of his arteries, proof of the fatal arrow wound. No dramatics, no ambiguity. Just cold, clinical truth served with prehistoric flair. In the end, Ötzi unwittingly became the star of the most thorough forensic examination in human history. CSI teams dream of cases this clear. Doctors dream of patients this well preserved. Ötzi. He probably just wanted to be left alone. After 3 decades of research, countless publications, and more scientific debates than any frozen corpse should ever inspire, one thing remains painfully clear. Nobody can agree on why Ötzi died. Sure, we know how. The arrow to the back was not subtle, but the why has launched more theories than a conspiracy forum on a slow Tuesday 1 theory suggests tribal conflict. Maybe Ötzi stumbled into a feud between neighbouring groups. Maybe someone from another village didn't appreciate his copper axe flex. Or maybe he insulted the wrong person's goats, because in 3300 BCE, livestock drama was basically international politics. Under this theory, Ötzi was collateral damage in a conflict far bigger than himself. Another popular explanation is the territorial dispute. Humans have always been weirdly attached to land, even land that is cold, rocky, and generally hostile to life. It's possible that Ötzi wandered into someone else's hunting zone, someone who responded with the prehistoric equivalent of, "Get off my lawn," followed immediately by, "Here's an arrow in your lung for emphasis." Then there's the leadership theory, which is very flattering to Ötzi. Some researchers think he may have been a leader, maybe even a chief. His valuable belongings, especially the copper axe, support the idea. If so, his death could have been a political assassination. Prehistoric politics were likely as chaotic as modern politics, except with fewer speeches and more stabbing. A more dramatic theory is revenge. Remember those 4 different blood types on his gear? That suggests Ötzi had a very hands-on day before his death. Perhaps he injured someone earlier, or killed someone during a fight, and their comrades pursued him into the mountains. If that's true, Ötzi didn't just die. He lost a rematch he didn't even want. And then there's my personal favourite, the personal drama theory. Humans are messy creatures. Always have been, always will be. Maybe this wasn't about land or politics or tribes. Maybe it was something absurdly personal. A stolen tool, a broken promise, a romantic rivalry. The Copper Age version of, you said you'd help me build a fence and then you didn't. Under this theory, Ötzi's murder wasn't historical. It was petty. But here's the truth. All these theories keep circulating because humans desperately want motives to make sense. We want clean narratives. We want answers. But prehistoric life wasn't organised enough for tidy explanations. In the end, the theories won't die because they're all possible. But unfortunately, Ötzi didn't get the same privilege. 5,000 years is a long time to stay relevant. Most people can barely stay relevant for 5 months, but Ötzi? He's aging like a fine archaeological wine, still revealing secrets, still inspiring documentaries, still accidentally teaching us about the human condition. His death matters not because he was royalty, or a celebrity, or a man of great political influence. It matters because he was painfully, wonderfully ordinary, and his death preserved a snapshot of prehistoric life that textbooks can't fake. Before Ötzi, most of what we knew about the European Copper Age was guesswork based on pottery shards, stone tools, and the occasional burial site that looked more like a decorative pile of bones than anything with context. But Ötzi changed the game. He wasn't just a skeleton. He was a whole human. Clothes, tools, stomach contents, tattoos, wounds, drama. He was the full package, the Copper Age influencer we never asked for. His death also forced researchers to rethink assumptions about early societies. For decades, historians painted prehistoric Europe as this peaceful, cosy era where everyone held hands, shared berries, and sang songs about communal harmony. Then Ötzi popped out of the ice, tattooed, armed, injured, and murdered. And historians collectively said, so humans have always been like this. He showed the brutality and complexity of early life. People fought, people hunted, people held grudges, and people performed medical treatments sophisticated enough to make modern wellness influencers jealous. His tattoos proved early humans understood chronic pain. His gear proved they understood craftsmanship. His clothing proved they understood insulation better than some modern outdoor brands. Even his final moments matter. The arrow still embedded in him revealed early battlefield tactics. Ambush from behind, shoot for the arteries, don't stick around. A crime as old as humanity itself, preserved in the ice with forensic perfection. And the global fascination with his story tells us something important. People crave a personal connection to the past. We don't just want dates and timelines. We want a face, a life, a mystery. Ötzi provides all three. He matters because he collapsed on a glacier at the exact angle that allowed science to piece together his last day like a Copper Age puzzle. He matters because his story is both tragic and relatable, the tale of a man trying to survive a world that wasn't built to be kind. And ultimately, he matters because his death reminds us that history is not distant, it's human, messy, violent, emotional, and apparently excellent at preservation. If a detective from the modern world were transported back to 3,300 BCE, they'd probably last 15 minutes before quitting no fingerprints, no witnesses, no security cameras, no forensics labs. And yet, somehow, the universe decided to preserve Ötzi's crime scene so perfectly that thousands of years later, modern science managed to do what no Copper Age detective ever could: solve the world's oldest cold case. Quite literally, a cold case, refrigerated by nature itself. The irony is delicious. Ötzi's killer probably walked away from the scene convinced they had committed the perfect murder. A remote mountaintop, a dying man. No one around. The Alps make an excellent accomplice. A silent, icy partner who tells no tales. Except the glacier wasn't loyal. It kept every detail. It filed every piece of evidence. It protected the body, the clothes, the tools, the wounds, the stomach contents, and yes, even the murder weapon still embedded in his shoulder. The glacier was the best forensic archivist in history. It just took 5 millennia to open the file. And what does the file say? It tells the story of a man chased up a mountain, wounded, exhausted, then struck down by a well-aimed arrow. It reveals friends, enemies, or frenemies involved in a violent confrontation before the final blow. It shows the desperate repairs to his weapons, the panic meal, the retreat to higher ground. It shows betrayal, fear, survival instinct, and finally, collapse. Modern forensics closed the case in a way Copper Age people never could. CT scans revealed the torn artery. Blood analysis revealed multiple attackers. Tattoo mapping revealed chronic pain. DNA sequencing revealed his ancestry. Pollen analysis revealed the route he took. Even the microscopic abrasions on his arrows revealed how he used them in the final struggle. This level of detail is why Ötzi's murder is not just a story, it's a legacy. He didn't choose to become the most scientifically examined man in history. He didn't choose to have his last moments replayed in every documentary ever made. He didn't choose fame. He just had the misfortune to die in an exceptionally well-preserving freezer. And yet, his story endures because it's not about kings or empires. It's about a human being, flawed, injured, running, fighting, eating, surviving, until he didn't. The case is closed, the mystery solved, the killer gone forever. But Ötzi, he remains, a frozen witness, telling his story long after everyone involved turned to dust. The oldest murder in history didn't stay buried. The ice made sure of that. At the heart of ancient Rome, long before the scents of modern cafes and street vendors filled our cities, there stood a place every Roman, rich or poor, knew intimately. The Thermopolium picture. A narrow street where sunlight bounces off clay tiles, where wagons rumble slowly over uneven stones, and where every corner hums with chatter about gladiators, taxes, and whatever scandal the emperor has created this week. Now picture, tucked between a baker's shop and a linen stall, a lively open-air tavern with its marble counter jutting out toward the street, like an invitation. This is the Roman equivalent of a fast food stand, and at almost any hour of the day, it is crowded. The counter itself is the heart of the experience. Built from stone or brick and polished smooth by generations of forearms leaning over it, it's lined with deep terracotta jars, dolia, resting in circular holes. Each jar holds something warm, fragrant, and ready to eat. Lentil stew simmering in a thick, earthy broth, olives swimming in brine, honeyed nuts, spiced chickpeas, or even leftover cuts of pork soaking in garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce Romans loved far more than we ever could. Steam rises from the warmer jars, carrying hints of herbs like lovage, fennel, and thyme. Before the lunch crowds arrive, the owner wipes down the counter, stirs the pots, and checks the coals beneath the jars to keep everything at just the right heat. Behind him, a small kitchen rattles with activity, wood crackling, ladles tapping against clay, and a young helper trying not to burn himself while fishing out stew with a long-handled spoon. By late morning, the first customers appear, labourers with dust on their tunics, fishermen coming in from the river, a tired-looking scribe escaping his cramped office for a moment of warmth and gossip. They step up, balancing clay bowls in one hand and coins in the other. There are no chairs, no private tables, no polished settings, just the counter, the street, and the constant flow of life surrounding them. They eat standing, leaning slightly forward to avoid dripping stew on their sandals, half listening to the conversations around them. And this is where the magic begins, because a Thermopolium was more than a place to eat. It was where everyday Romans came to refill their stomachs and their spirits, catching up on news, scandals, and the pulse of the city itself. A Thermopolium did not offer a grand feast, but what it lacked in elegance, it made up for in warmth, familiarity, and the irresistible comfort of simple food. The menu changed from tavern to tavern, but certain staples appeared everywhere. Humble dishes that fueled Rome's labourers, sailors, and market vendors from sunrise to dusk. The moment you stepped up to the counter, you could smell the day's offerings before you ever saw them. First, there was pulse, the thick wheat porridge that had sustained Romans for centuries. Sometimes it was plain and practical, little more than grain and water. Other times it was enriched with herbs or cooked with bits of vegetables, forming a soft, hearty base that stuck to the ribs. Next to it simmered lentil stew, dark and earthy, thickened by hours of slow cooking. The lentils softened until they nearly dissolved, creating a creamy texture flavoured with garlic, olive oil, and crushed coriander seeds. This was one of the cheapest meals available, perfect for men who needed energy more than refinement. Beside the stews sat bowls piled high with olives, their skins glossy from the brine. Black, green, wrinkled or smooth, each type carried a slightly different taste, and patrons often took a handful to snack on as they walked. If a tavern was lucky enough to be close to the coast, you might also find pickled fish, salted anchovies, or scraps of tuna preserved in oil. But no Roman meal felt complete without bread. Not the soft, airy loaves we know today, but dense rounds of wheat or barley, often stamped with a bakery mark. Customers tore off chunks to scoop stew, soak up sauces, or simply chew between sips of cheap wine watered down just enough to stretch the tavern's supplies. And then, of course, came garum, Rome's favourite flavour enhancer. Sharp, salty, and utterly unmistakable, it was drizzled over nearly everything. A bowl of lentils became richer. A slice of bread gained depth. Even olives found new life when dipped lightly into the fermented sauce. To the Romans, garum was not strange. It was essential, the taste of home, the taste of the empire itself. As customers ate, they wiped their bowls clean, returned them to the counter, and, if coins allowed, ordered seconds for many. This simple, fragrant menu was not a treat, but a daily routine, the fuel that kept the entire city moving hour after hour. If there was one thing that defined street food in ancient Rome, it was movement. Nothing stood still for long. Not the crowds, not the gossip, not even the customers themselves. Eating at a thermopolium was never a leisurely event. There were no cushioned seats, no shade-lined terraces, no servers gracefully weaving between tables. Instead, Romans ate standing up, balancing clay bowls in their palms, while shifting their weight to avoid being bumped by those rushing past. The rhythm of the street didn't stop just because a man wanted lunch, so patrons learned to adapt, leaning against walls, fountain edges, or even each other as they spooned stew into their mouths. The bowls were rounded and small enough to cradle easily, yet deep enough to hold a hearty portion of lentils, chickpeas, or barley porridge. Bread was torn one-handed, used as both utensil and sponge, and wine, often watered down, was gulped from simple ceramic cups. A quick meal meant efficiency, and the average Roman had perfected the skill. The standing habit was not only practical, but social. Hunger brought people together, and the thermopolium acted as a sort of informal neighbourhood forum. One man might be finishing a bowl while another squeezed in beside him, already launching into a complaint about taxes or the heat. Someone else might be recounting the results of last night's chariot race. A fisherman brushing salt from his tunic might jokingly argue with a baker about whose work was tougher. Even strangers briefly became companions, connected by the shared moment of pausing in a city that rarely paused for anything. This style of eating reinforced a deep Roman preference. Meals were for necessity, not luxury, unless you were wealthy. While the aristocrats reclined on couches at private banquets, the working classes considered a filling bowl eaten upright to be perfectly normal. For them, eating standing wasn't a sign of hardship, but simply a rhythm of life. It allowed them to finish lunch in minutes before returning to their trade, chores, or daily responsibilities. What made the scene even more vivid was the constant backdrop of sound: vendors shouting, children running, pots clattering, donkeys braying, and fountains splashing. all of it mingled with the aroma of warm stew and fresh bread. And amidst this daily commotion, the simple act of eating while standing became a uniquely Roman ritual, fast, functional, and full of human connection. If the thermopolium fed the stomach, it also fed something even more essential to Roman life: conversation. These crowded street taverns were the beating heart of everyday gossip. News did not spread through tidy announcements or written bulletins. It passed from mouth to mouth, ladle to bowl, customer to customer. Anyone who stepped up for a quick meal became part of this living network of whispers, jokes, rumours, and bold opinions about the events shaping the city. The favourite topic: gladiators. Rome's working-class citizens loved them with the same energy modern crowds reserve for famous athletes. As bowls were filled and coins exchanged, someone inevitably brought up yesterday's fight in the amphitheatre. "Did you see that Gaul's footwork? Swift as Mercury," one man might say, waving his spoon mid-air. Another shook his head, dismissive. "Footwork means nothing if he can't hold a shield. I'm betting on the Thracian next time." Even those who couldn't afford a ticket to the arena felt they were part of the action through these heated debates. But gladiators were only the beginning. People gossiped about everything: emperors, senators, grain shortages, military campaigns, scandals, marriages, divorces, and hopelessly corrupt tax collectors. A rumour could take shape in under a minute. One man mentioned that the emperor seemed ill during a public appearance. By afternoon, half the neighbourhood was convinced Roman politics would collapse by nightfall. Another whispered that a wealthy noblewoman had secretly divorced her husband. Someone else swore they saw her slipping into a merchant's home after dark. Truth, exaggeration, and imagination merged seamlessly. The thermopolium owner occasionally tried to calm the uproar, but he rarely succeeded. His tavern was less a restaurant and more a stage where Rome performed itself. Market women chimed in with sharp insights. Dock workers described the latest shipments from Egypt. A young apprentice boasted about overhearing his master talk to a senator, though no one believed him. All of it flowed freely from group to group, turning strangers into conversational partners. In a city of 1,000,000 souls, where most people lived in cramped, noisy apartments, the thermopolium became a place where daily life felt shared. Worries softened when spoken aloud. Opinions sharpened when challenged. And even the simplest bowl of lentils tasted richer when eaten in the middle of a heated debate about who would triumph in the next gladiator match. Here, standing between simmering jars and passing crowds, Romans found nourishment not only in food, but in the stories that tied their lives together. Before you even reached the counter of a thermopolium, your senses announced its presence. The smells drifted first: warm lentils softened in olive oil, chickpea mash spiced with cumin, roasted nuts glazed in honey, and, unmistakably, the sharp tang of garum wafting through the air like a beacon of Roman identity. These aromas mingled with the scent of whetstone, sweat, incense from nearby shrines, and the ever-present dust kicked up by passing carts. The entire street became a tapestry of fragrances, both pleasant and overwhelming, reflecting the raw truth of a crowded ancient city. Next came the sounds. Rome never slept, but during the midday rush, it roared. Shopkeepers shouted prices, children chased each other between stalls, and travelling merchants clanged bronze trinkets together to draw attention. In the distance, a blacksmith hammered iron into shape. Clang, hiss, clang, while a donkey brayed in protest as a handler tugged it through the crush of people. Patrons gathered around the thermopolium added their own layer of noise: clay bowls clinking against the counter, ladles scraping the bottoms of deep jars, and voices overlapping in a dozen simultaneous conversations. Then there was the chaos, the kind that would overwhelm someone unused to Roman life, but felt completely natural to those who grew up in its rhythm. People moved constantly. Shoppers with baskets full of figs, soldiers on errands, fishermen carrying nets that dripped onto the pavement, young apprentices racing to deliver messages for their masters, and slaves hurrying with jars of water balanced precariously on their shoulders. Everyone seemed to be in motion except the thermopolium owner, who somehow remained steady amid the whirlwind, stirring stew, serving bowls, making change, and shouting orders to his helper without missing a beat. Street performers occasionally joined the fray, a flute player hoping for a coin, a juggler showing off for a crowd, or a storyteller reciting cheeky verses about the latest scandal. Their presence added colour to the street, giving customers something to watch while waiting for their meal. What made the Thermopolium environment so remarkable was the sense of shared space. No walls separated diners from the street, no doors muted the sounds. Eating here meant being part of Rome's daily heartbeat. Every scent, shout and shuffle of feet became woven into the experience. Food was not simply consumed, it was lived, surrounded by the full, unfiltered energy of one of history's greatest cities. In this chaos, Romans found comfort. Noise meant life, and life meant belonging. Behind every steaming pot and every freshly filled bowl stood the men and women who transformed raw ingredients into the daily fuel of the Roman population. The workers of the Thermopolium were not wealthy restaurateurs or respected chefs. They were ordinary Romans, often from humble backgrounds, who carried the weight of the city's hunger on their shoulders. Their world was one of constant heat, constant motion, and constant noise. The owner, usually called the Caupo, was the centre of the operation. He woke before sunrise, when the city was still dim and quiet, to begin preparing the day's food. Before customers ever arrived, he had already lit the furnace, arranged the clay jars, ground herbs with a stone mortar, and stirred pots full of lentils that needed hours to soften. His movements were practiced and efficient, more like a craftsman than a simple cook. He knew exactly how much salt to add when the chickpeas reached the perfect texture, and how to keep the stew warm without burning it. Working beside him, though often less noticed, were apprentices or slaves, usually boys or young men, who handled the hardest tasks. They hauled water from public fountains, chopped vegetables, washed soot-blackened cooking pots, and ran back and forth to nearby markets for extra bread or olives when supplies ran low. Their tunics carried the permanent scent of smoke and stew, and their hands were constantly stained with oil. Yet without them, the Thermopolium could not function for even an hour. Women also played a role, especially in taverns run as family businesses. They might knead bread, season dishes, count coins, or serve customers during the busiest hours of the day. Some even prepared small desserts, like honeyed pastries, to sell alongside the savoury meals. Their voices were often sharp, practical, and experienced, cutting through the chaos with instructions or warnings shouted over the counter. A good Thermopolium depended on more than cooking skill. It required endurance. Workers faced burning heat from the stove, heavy clay vessels to lift, and the relentless flow of customers demanding quick service. Coins exchanged hands constantly. Tempers flared when portions seemed too small, and the owner needed the instincts of both a businessman and a diplomat to keep everyone satisfied. These workers rarely received praise. Most customers barely noticed their effort, focusing only on the food placed in their bowls. Yet they were the quiet backbone of Roman street life. Through their labour, thousands found nourishment every day. They fed soldiers, sailors, merchants, craftsmen, beggars, travellers, and in doing so they helped keep the largest city of the ancient world alive and moving. Their contribution was humble, but indispensable. No meal at a Thermopolium felt complete without something to wash it down, and in ancient Rome the drink of choice, no matter the hour, was wine. To modern taste buds, Roman wine might have seemed harsh, thick, or overly sweet, but to the people of the empire it was a daily necessity. Even the poorest Romans expected a cup of it with their lunch. Not the finest vintages, of course. Those were reserved for banquets and noble households, but a cheap, mass-produced variety that flowed as freely as the Tiber itself. The wine served at street taverns was almost always mixed with water, a practice Romans considered civilized and essential. Drinking wine straight from the barrel was associated with barbarians, wild Gauls, rude Thracians, or anyone who lacked Roman discipline. So even at the humblest Thermopolium, the owner kept a jug of water beside the wine jar, diluting the drink just enough to stretch the supply. It didn't always improve the flavour, but it kept the price low and the customers content. On hotter days, a customer might ask for wine mixed with a splash of vinegar. A sour drink called posca, popular with soldiers and labourers, its sharp bite cut through the heat and dust, and it was cheap enough that even a man with only a few coins to spare could afford it. Those who preferred sweet